As we go to prayer tonight, I wanted to review this story from John chapter 11. What a great, great story. And, you know, it's getting close to his time of crucifixion here in chapter 11 of the Gospel of John. And so this story is just so, wow, it's just so prophetic about what's going to happen in his life. And here in verse 1, it starts off, "Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus, of Bethany, the town of Mary and her sister Martha." And Bethany was southeast of Jerusalem. It was about 2 hours away walking distance. Actually, about an hour away, excuse me. It was about 2 miles away from Jerusalem, about an hour in walking distance away from the roads. And Bethany, it was just a little village. Even today, what they consider to be Bethany, I looked it up today, only has like 760 people living in it. So it's just even then it was a real little village. It was where, you know, remember Mary and Martha? Martha was busy about getting things ready for dinner or supper, and Mary was the one that sat at Jesus' feet. Well, this was the same house, the same people, and so this was a place where Jesus is frequented. And Jesus, from all appearance, really liked being here. These were close friends of his. And so now, this close friend Lazarus becomes sick. It was that Mary which had anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Therefore his sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom thou lovest is sick. So it's very obvious from this story and from the others that Jesus felt very close, very personal with Lazarus and Mary and Martha. When Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God might be glorified thereby. And I wrote there in your notes, just as an encouragement for all of us, you know, we're all facing problems and trials, and it might be sickness, it might be financial, it might be whatever. But whatever circumstance we're facing, those circumstances are in your life by the hand of God. And we need to remember that. There are no accidents, there are no mistakes, and God orders these circumstances in our life for his glory. So when you look at the trial that you're in right now, and sometimes we get impatient and frustrated with it, just think about this. How can God be glorified in me through this situation? Because that's why it's there. And that's what he's speaking there in verse 4 to his disciples as he's explaining to them about this sickness that has come on Lazarus. Philippians chapter 1 verse 20 sums it up, where Paul says, according to my earnest expectation in my hope, that in nothing I shall be ashamed. Now, when he says, in nothing I shall be ashamed, he's not talking about personal embarrassment. He's not saying, boy, I hope I don't make a fool out of myself. I hope I don't, stick my foot in my mouth. That's not what he's saying. What he would be ashamed for is what follows here, but that with all boldness as always, so now also, Christ shall be magnified in my body, whether it be by what? By life or by death. And so Paul's greatest desire here, the priority of his life, I want Jesus to be magnified in me. I want people to see Jesus in what I say and in what I do. I want people to see Jesus in how I love and how I forgive. I want people to see Jesus in how I hate sin and love righteousness. I want people to see in me Jesus, whether it be by life or by death. He was saying, in whatever circumstance I'm in, whatever trial I'm in, I want Jesus to be magnified in me. And so as we face different trials and problems in our life, we need to take that same approach. How can Jesus be magnified in me through this problem, through this trial, through this sickness, through this thing that's causing me such stress and pressure? How can Jesus shine through me in this situation? Because he says here, this sickness is not unto death. This sickness has come on Lazarus for the glory of God, so that God's power might become manifest. Because when you and I are weak, that is when we are strong. That's when God and his strength and his power can shine through us the strongest. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. When he had heard, therefore, that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. And we know the story so well. This was part of the plan, wasn't it? We think Jesus stayed put. Didn't he rush over to Bethany, to the house, to take care of the situation? No, he abode 2 days still where he was. I put there in your notes, when it seems that God is not listening, or he's not near, or he's not working, he's late, he's not taking care of my problems like I want him to, he's not improving the quality of my life, which I thought for sure he would do. It's in those times where it seems that God is distant. It's in those times when his greatest purposes are at work. And so in the middle of a trial or a problem, if you just feel stuck in limbo, and it doesn't feel like he's listening, it doesn't feel like anything's happening, just know some of God's greatest purposes are being carried out. And I wanted to remind you of these people. Remember Abraham and Sarah? They waited 25 years for the birth of Isaac. That's a long time, isn't it? The promise first came to Abraham when he was 75. Isaac was born when he was 100, well past the time of fertility for either him or Sarah. And can you imagine waiting those 25 years saying, is God doing anything? You know, from 75, and then it was when Abraham was 90 years old that God renewed the promise to his heart and appeared to him. So for 15 years, God really kind of went silent on the subject, if you think about it. You know, we read it there in Genesis, and it seems things are just, happening bang, 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 but years are going by. And Abraham and Sarah are just waiting. And it seems like God isn't doing anything. And that's when the greatest miracles are taking place. That's when God's greatest purposes are being done, and that's when God's greatest purposes are being done in you. Those times where it seems like nothing's happening. Joseph was betrayed and separated from his family for 22 years. That's kind of an approximate figure, but it was somewhere over 20 years. Moses was in the wilderness for 40 years before God appears to him in the burning bush. So for 40 years, Moses had this passion, this revelation in his heart that Israel was to be delivered from Egypt, and here he waits for 40 years. It seems like, God, what are you doing? Nothing's happening. Did you forget about me? Those are the greatest times in God's purposes many times. So don't get discouraged. Don't give up. Verse 7, then after that he saith to his disciples, let us go into Judea again. And his disciples said unto him, Master, the Jews just tried to stone you. Are you really going to go there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeth the light of this world. Personally, verses 9 and 10 can be a little bit ambiguous, but what I believe Jesus is saying is that the days of his life, the days of his ministry on the earth, are the day that he's referring to in verse 9, and he's trying to tell his disciples, look, the darkness, my death, has not yet come, so they can't do anything to me as long as we are in the day of my life. But if a man walk in the night, that's when he stumbles, because his time is up, his time is over, because there is no light in him. It's God's time for him to die. And so he's saying, this is the time of light, this is the time of day, and nothing's going to happen to me until the appointed time. So let's go. The Jews might try, but they can't do anything until Father says it's time. These things saith he, and after that he saith unto him, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. And Jesus was not trying to be coy here. he was speaking out of the honesty of his heart. He didn't see death as being anything different than sleep. And to him, it took no greater power to wake Lazarus up out of sleep than it did to raise him from the dead. And can you see that in the mind of God? You know, we think of death as such a great hurdle. And how in the world, man, if someone was brought back to life from the dead, what a tremendous display of power. What a great miracle that is. And to God, it's just like waking someone up from a nap. That's how powerful he is. Then said his disciples, Lord, if he sleep, he's doing well. You know, his disciples are thinking, Master, you know, do you realize what you're saying? It'd be nice if he was just asleep, but he's not. Howbeit Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking of rest in sleep. Then, to clarify the situation, Jesus said unto them plainly, look, Lazarus is dead. I understand the confusion here. I understand what you're saying. I know what's going on. Verse 15, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. So Jesus here is revealing part of the plan, why he stayed put for 2 days, because he said, I want you to see the power of God that you might believe. You're about to see something tremendous that you've never seen before. Then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us go also, that we may die with him. You know, every party has to have a party pooper, right? And that was Thomas. And, you know, when Jesus was risen from the dead, what was Thomas's reaction? I don't believe it. And so, you know, one thing that I like about this, that it reveals here, it shows us that Jesus calls all types, doesn't it? And so, you know, he calls Peter, who is brash and arrogant and a loudmouth, and he calls a guy like Thomas, who is always negative and down in the mouth and assuming the worst. And it just shows you Jesus calls everyone, and his mercy and his salvation is to all. And he'll take people like a Peter, and he'll take people like a Thomas, and he'll work with them, and he'll cleanse their hearts and renew their minds. Then when Jesus came, he found out Lazarus had lain in the grave for 4 days already. It's amazing. Have you guys ever read, like on the internet, what happens to a dead body in 24 hours, and then in 48 hours, and then in 72 hours? It gets really gross. Things start popping and exploding, and gases start coming out, and body fluids start oozing, and really some nasty stuff. You know, I'm sure you've heard before, as soon as your body dies, within minutes, your internal organs begin to decompose. I mean, instantly. And so after 4 days, this is an ugly sight. It's a mess. Now Bethany was nigh unto Jerusalem, about 15 furlongs off. And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Then Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him. But Mary sat still in the house. Then said Martha unto Jesus, Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. Now that statement, seems like there's faith in that statement, doesn't there? But what's happening here, and we'll see this as the narrative continues, Martha is putting a threshold on the power of God. And really what she's saying, if you read between the lines, is, Jesus, you can heal the sick, but now that Lazarus is dead, you can't raise the dead. Do you see how death in her mind is final? And there's no coming back from death. There's coming back from sickness, but there's no coming back from death. And I think we all have that tendency, and one thing we need to ask ourselves tonight, are we putting any threshold on the power of God? Are we saying God can do this, but he can't do that? And we're going to find out here in this story, you can't do that with the power. The power of God has no limits, no thresholds, no deadlines. You know, it's one thing to think, well, you know, gee, Jesus, too bad you were late. God's power is never late. It's never too late for God's miracle. But I know that even now, whatsoever thou wilt ask of God, God will give it thee. And it's interesting here. You kind of see her waffling in her faith back and forth. And again, this is one of those spots where you're just so glad that the Holy Spirit included all of this detail, because it sounds like us, doesn't it? Don't we waffle at times, and we go back and forth, and one day we're up and we're really encouraged, and we know God can do anything, and God's going to break through, and in the next day or the next hour, we're all discouraged, thinking, oh, it's impossible. Jesus said unto her, thy brother shall rise again. And watch what she says. I know that he shall rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Now see, this is another one of those limitations we put on God. We know God will do this then, but what about now? You know God can do miracles, but do you believe God can do a miracle here, tonight, in this very room, among us? Where is your faith? Where is that threshold? Where are we limiting God in our faith tonight? You know, faith is a choice. You don't have to feel like it. You don't have to have some emotional surge of, I just really feel positive about God doing a miracle. It's a choice. I choose to believe that nothing is impossible with God. It's just that simple. And we don't put it off to the last day or some other day. And we don't put it off, well, God does miracle in those churches, but not our church. Or God does a miracle for those people, but not our family. No, we believe God does miracles here and now for us in our life. And it's not based upon us or, how passionate or fervent our prayer is. It's based upon, do we choose to believe that nothing is impossible? Do we choose to believe that he can work here, now, tonight, simply through our prayers? Jesus said unto her, I am the resurrection. You don't have to wait for the last days. I am the resurrection, and I'm here now, just like Jesus is here with us now. It can happen here, right before our eyes. I am the resurrection and the life. He that believeth in me, though he were dead, yet shall he live. If I can bring healing for sickness, I can bring the dead back to life, is what he's saying. There's no difference to God. One's not harder or easier than the other. Whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die. Believest thou this? And I put there in your notes, this is one of the great hope that we have as a Christian. Just think about it. As a Christian, you never, ever have to fear death. Death is just a passage for us. Death is never an end. Death is really the beginning for us of eternal life. And whosoever believeth in him shall never die. You just pass from one life into the next. She said unto him, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which shall come into the world. I put there, Martha sidestepped Jesus' challenge. Remember, what did he say? He said, do you believe this? And I think Jesus would ask us tonight. I think he'd probably go around the room and ask each one of us individually, do you believe? Do you believe anything's too hard for the Lord? Are you praying big prayers, or are you praying small prayers? Are you believe that miracles is for someday, or do you believe miracles can happen right here tonight as we pray and ask Father? But she said, Yea, Lord, I believe that thou art the Christ, the Son of God, which shall come into the world. Kind of funny how our doctrine kicks in place of our faith. When our faith should be saying, yes, Lord, I believe that even here now, nothing's too hard for you. And when she had said so, she went her way and called Mary her sister secretly, saying, The Master is come, and calleth for thee. And as soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came unto him. Now Jesus was not yet come into the town, but was in that place where Martha met him. The Jews then which were with her in the house and comforted her, when they saw Mary, that she rose up hastily and went out, followed her, saying, She goeth unto the grave to weep there. Then when Mary was come where Jesus was, she saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying unto him, now these two sisters must have been talking about this prior, because watch what comes out of Mary's mouth, the exact same thing. Lord, if thou hadst been here, my brother had not died. And again, she's putting a limiter on the power of God. Jesus, you can heal the sick, but you can't raise the dead. Raising the dead is this kind of over the top. When Jesus therefore saw her weeping, and the Jews also weeping which came with her, he did what? He groaned in the spirit and was troubled. Troubled at the unbelief. Troubled that they were limiting their faith. Troubled that they were limiting God's power. Troubled that they didn't believe that the resurrection and the life was standing before them and could bring Lazarus back from the dead even after 4 days. And said, Where have you laid him? They said unto him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. Then said the Jews, Behold how he loved him. But I think the context kind of reveals why Jesus was crying. Some of them said, Could not this man, which opened the eyes of the blind, have caused that even this man should not have died? So now we're beginning to see why Jesus tarried 2 days. We're beginning to see why Jesus let Lazarus die. Because they needed the power of God to be demonstrated to them. And you know, when we're going through tough times in our life, what does God have to let die in our life to demonstrate to us his power and his plan? Jesus, therefore, again, groaning in himself, cometh to the grave. It was a cave, and a stone lay upon it. There's lots of things in our lives that God allows to die so that his glory and his power can become that much more obvious. So when things are dying in your life, don't despair. Know that the resurrection and the life is there with you, and he can bring things back to life to prove his greatness. Jesus said, Take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him that was dead, said unto him, Lord, by this time he stinketh. He's been in there 4 days. Jesus said unto her, Said I not unto thee, that if thou would believe, thou should what? You should see the glory of God. And I really believe Jesus is saying that to us tonight. As we go to prayer, as we believe, we will see the glory of God. As you pray tonight, don't put it off onto some other day. Don't put a limit on God's power. I believe that when we pray for those polyps to dissolve and disappear in John and in Cheryl, I believe they can actually dissolve and disappear. And that's what we're praying for. We don't limit God's power. We don't put it off into another day or another church or in the sweet by and by. We believe Jesus is the resurrection and the life. He's the great physician, the healer. And tonight, those polyps can dissolve and go. Well, what if they don't? That's up to Father. But we never stop praying the biggest and the best. We never stop praying for anything less but that the resurrection and the life perform his miracles among us. Then took they away the stone from the place where the dead was laid, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank thee that thou hast heard me. And I know that thou hearest me always, but because of the people which stand by, I said it, that they may believe that thou hast sent me. And when he had spoken, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he that was dead came forth, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was bound about with a napkin. Jesus said unto them, Loose him and let him go. So as we go to prayer tonight, I want you to think about these principles in this story. Don't limit God. Don't put a deadline on God's power. God's power is never late. Don't put a threshold on God's power. Believing is a choice. I choose to believe that the resurrection and the life can do far beyond any human imagination or ability. You don't have to feel a certain way. You don't have to feel some emotional surge. Faith is a choice. I choose to believe, and I'm going to pray big and believe that God will move in His infinite power.